Today, I want to share my dark night of the soul experience that led me out of the Mormon Church. I wanted to share a quote from Lee Harris. He said that if today you suddenly become aware that your life is not how you want it to be, that is not a tragedy. It is a gift because you have seen something you did not see before. You have seen the next part of the journey. So my dark night of the soul started with a back injury. I injured my back in October of 2009, and I spent all of 2010 trying to overcome the blown discs. I had blown 2 discs in my back, and I had several cortisone shots. I was on pain medication, and at this time in my life, I was teaching jazzercise, and I did that for about 10 years, off and on. So I was teaching jazzercise. I was training for a race in Utah that they have called Ragnar. It's the Wasatch Back Ragnar race. They run from Logan to Park City, basically, with the team. And so I was a very active person at this time in my life, and this back injury just was taking me down. And so my dark night of the soul really started to take shape in December of 2010. And my family was going skiing. So half of my family was going skiing that weekend. It was December 17th. 2010. It's funny how those dates can stand out in your mind. It was a very significant weekend for me. My husband was taking 3 of our children skiing, and I was staying home with 2 of our kids at that time, our youngest 2, and or maybe 3. I don't know for sure. But we had gotten into a fight that weekend before he left to go skiing, and I had to stay to teach a jazzercise class, and our oldest son was getting married at the time, and we had temple recommends, and he was going to get married in the temple, so we were planning on being there. But my husband had started a new job, and I was trying to balance our budget with his new income, and paying tithing was very tight for us. It put us in a position that was we were just barely making ends meet, and that happened a lot in our marriage. So this wasn't something new where we were trying to figure out how do we pay tithing and put money away for the wedding, and tithing was really the main issue. I wanted to be a full tithe payer. I was raised very black and white in the church, and my husband was raised more gray. So to him, it wasn't such a big deal. I either had to just spend less because he wasn't going to take away from our savings to pay tithing. And so it was just kind of like the straw that broke literally my back. This fight that we had over money. It was a fight we'd had, many times before, but something changed within me with that fight. It just felt like we were never going to be on the same page spiritually. And so I was wrestling with that over the weekend, and I went and taught my class on Saturday. Everything was, normal. I was used to living in pain and teaching in pain, but something happened that night, Saturday night to Sunday, and that night my body reflected the feelings that I was having spiritually, emotionally, mentally, and it all caught up to me physically. And in the night, while I was sleeping, went to bed, I was still functional. That morning, I could not walk when I woke up. I literally, the only way to get around the house was crawling or with crutches. I could not use my left leg. And so My husband gets home on Sunday from skiing, and we go to a different doctor on Monday. Now, this is, right before Christmas, December of 2010. And the new doctor wanted to give me another cortisone shot. And I'd already had 3 in that past year, and only 1 had worked. So I wasn't very hopeful that it would work, but his thought was, let's do the cortisone shot, put you on the schedule for surgery right after Christmas, and just try to get you more comfortable. And so we did. I did the shot, but it still didn't work. But he gave me some pain medication, better pain medication, that actually did help me to function and get through the holidays. And with the help of my sister, I did use a wheelchair and crutches until the surgery, which happened on December 29th of 2010. And surgery, scraping out my disc, because it was putting pressure on my nerve, it pretty much immediately resolved my pain. I woke up from surgery feeling like a brand new person. And the thing about back surgery is you cannot move for, well, at least for me, it was 2 weeks. I was bedridden and had to wear a back brace. And so I still had 2 young kids at this point. I had a 2-year-old. My daughter with special needs was 2 at the time, and then a 4-year-old and a 9-year-old. So my mother-in-law came to help because for 2 weeks I was bedridden. There was no lifting my children, no getting out of bed to help do anything, no cooking, no cleaning. So it was the first time in I don't know how many years that I got a break from my life. And I was able to just lay in bed and recover. I could sit up for small periods of time. And it was during one of those periods of time when I was sitting up, and my husband had just given me a laptop to help, pass the time. And I found Mormon stories. I came across Mormon stories with John Dehlin, and at that time he was still a member of the church. So it really wasn't anti-Mormon. It was just interesting Mormon. And I remember clicking through, different stories, but on the side of my computer, there were just like advertisements and things. And there was one that caught my eye, and it was a blog called A Marvelous Work and a Blunder. And that's a play on the Mormon series, A Wonderful Work and a Wonder. Yeah. Anyways, it's a book series. Just the title of it, changing the word from wonder to blunder, kind of just caught my eye. So I clicked on it. And it was an anti-Mormon video blog. And they were talking about a talk from Elder Holland given in 2009 about the Book of Mormon. And I remembered that talk. I faithfully watched General Conference and always read the Ensign and reread the conference talks. And so I was familiar with the talk that they were talking about in this anti-Mormon blog. And I was just blown away because they pointed out every lie that Jeffrey Holland spoke in that conference. And the fact that the brethren, the general authorities, could lie in that most important meeting of Mormons. I mean, we just had General Conference for 2025. The thought that the men could lie and not tell the truth just blew my mind, and I didn't know what to do with it. And I think I watched, it was a series of several videos, and I think I watched them at least 2 or 3 times to be sure that what they were presenting in the video was a clear fact, that Jeffrey Holland had lied about certain things in his talk. And that was the crack in my shelf that just brought everything tumbling down. So I'd been a Mormon, raised a Mormon, raise my children. At that time I only had 7 kids, and raised them faithfully in this religion. My husband and I had been through the temple, 20 years earlier. So we'd been card-carrying members for 20 years. And that's all it took, was watching that one video for me to see that the life I had been living might have been a lie. And the church might not have been completely honest with its members and about the history of the church. So I was still, bedridden for 2 weeks. So my computer was my lifeline. Like, I went down that anti-Mormon rabbit hole and researched everything. It was just like one click would lead to something else. And then as soon as I could drive, after the 2 weeks of being bedridden, I went to the library and I checked out No Man Knows My History. That was the first one I read. And then The Mormon Enigma, Emma Smith's story, By His Own Hand Upon Papyrus. Read that one. Like, still had to be very careful. And so even though I could walk around and do mild housework, most of my time was spent reading and just trying to figure out the deception of the church and how it could justify lying, and lying by omission. I think that's the biggest way that the church deceives people, is they just don't tell the truth. They keep things hidden. And so in 2 weeks' time, pretty much my testimony was gone. It took me 2 years to unravel Christianity, and that's for a different video. But after this time of researching and studying, I kind of broke the news to my husband that I no longer believed in the church, and I didn't know how. Honestly, when I first told him that I didn't believe, I expected him to say, "Great, me too," and walk with me out of the church. Like, I did not know he was so tightly bound to the Mormon beliefs, because he'd been raised so gray within the church, and he, we'd had 20 years in the church at that point. Temple going people, but we hadn't started our marriage in the church. So I really didn't think he was going to have as big of issue with leaving the church. But I was wrong. I was very wrong about that. And he had no intention of researching anything. I tried to share with him the troubling issues that I found about the church and the history of the church, and he didn't want to know any of it. So I could not see a way forward for our marriage. I just thought, and the church pretty much teaches couples, like, if one spouse leaves, divorce is the best option, because staying in a mixed faith household is hard. And of course not recommended, because as far as the church goes, you're going to have an evil influence there on the family. So they encourage couples to get divorced if one of the spouses loses their faith. And I expected my husband to feel that way as well then, since he was clinging to the religion, but he didn't want a divorce. And so that was just really hard for me to wrap my head around, because if it had been the other way, if my husband had been the one to find out these issues, I think my Mormon self would have wanted to cling to that advice and find a husband who could take me to the celestial kingdom. Like, I always thought that would be a deal breaker for me if my husband completely left the church. But here the role was reversed, and it was me saying, I don't believe. So I did expect him to want a divorce from me. And I was very surprised when he didn't. The bishop, we did try to work with the bishop for a little bit, and he was horrible. He asked me to leave the room when we talked to him as a couple, and then he talked to Randy a few times by himself, and he was like, why can't you get a control of your wife? Like, you need to bring your wife back into the church and get control of her. And he told me this afterwards, that the bishop had told him that, and he just said, I don't control my wife. That's not how this marriage works. And the bishop was very discouraging and not helpful at all. So pretty much we were on our own to try and figure out how we were going to make this marriage work, or if we even wanted to make this marriage work. This was, January, and it was about another 6 weeks before we agreed that we were not going to get divorced and that I was not coming back to the church. It was not a path that I could continue to walk. Not in good conscience. I could not, and I didn't even really use or understand the word, what it meant to be authentic and to live an authentic life. I just knew I could not be a member of the church and pretend. That was just not going to happen. And after getting out of the church, I joined several ex-Mormon groups and realized there are so many people doing that. They live as Mormons, but they don't really believe it. And they'll hold recommends, they'll hold callings, and it's too hard to leave. So they play pretend like they do believe it all when they don't. And that shocked me. That was just another big, blew my mind that people would stay in this religion. Although I had a talk with my sister. One of my sisters had come to Colorado when we were living in Colorado, and we had discussed the church. And she said to me, even if I found out the church wasn't true, I would still choose to be a Mormon. I think it is just such a lovely way to live. That was her quote. That's what she said to me. And I was still Mormon at the time. And when she said that, I was like shocked to my core, because I'm like, if I ever find out the church is not true, I'm out. Like, no, I would not live this life. I would not choose to be a Mormon. And I didn't use this word with her at the time, but I was thinking, like, it is fucked up how much Mormons have to do. And I'm like, if I ever find out this church is not true, and it's still in that mind, at that moment in time, I could not wrap around the possibility that it might not be true. I was still pretty deeply, deeply Mormon, but I did know that if I ever found out it wasn't true, that I would leave it and leave it behind. And then I learned, how hard, it's much easier said than done because of the shunning. I was so excited to tell my family, oh my God, I don't believe this anymore. What else have they been deceiving us about? Because, Christianity, Mormonism is just a drop in the sea of Christianity. So that was the next thing like I went to, but Mormonism dissolved really quickly for me. And I couldn't wait to share it with my family. And I was shocked that my family, my parents, Randy's mom, because his father was passed at that point, but all of them were like, they just dug their heels into the belief system even tighter when I tried to talk to them about the problems of the church. And shunning, absolutely shunning, is a real thing that I did not expect to experience. I was naive. I thought my friends would still be my friends, but no, I lost all my close friends. My mother-in-law, who had been such a huge support system to me throughout my marriage. I was closer to her at that point in time than my own mother. And I immediately was being called a servant of Satan from my mother-in-law, which pierced my heart and hurt me to my core, that she would overnight, when I told her I no longer believed in the Mormon stories, in the Mormon myths, in the Book of Mormon, in any of that. Joseph Smith it turned out to be a quite evil, awful man, in my opinion. And in her eyes, the minute I said that, she flipped a switch about me, and I was now a servant of Satan. It was that quick and immediate. And the same with my parents. So now this is around April. My son is getting married in the temple in June. And I still have my recommend. I mean, my bishop at this point knew I no longer believed, because we talked to him in January, but he wasn't going to be present at the wedding. If I wanted to, I absolutely could have presented my recommend and gone in and witnessed my oldest child get married, my first child get married. But I could not bring myself to participate in what I considered to be, I wouldn't have called them pagan rituals, but I knew they were Freemasonic rituals that happened in the temple. So, an interesting side note, first I wrote an email to all the family and friends that I knew were still going to be Mormon and at my son's wedding. I wanted them to know what had happened, because Mormons are judgy and just truly not nice when it comes to people leaving the church. I knew people would talk about me behind my back, and I really just wanted to put my reasons for not being there up front and honest with all my close friends and family. So I did send out emails in the end of April talking about why I was not going to be present, why I no longer believed. And maybe that was the wrong thing to do, because like I said, I lost all my close friendships. But for myself, I felt like I could not stand in integrity if I did not do that. I had changed my mind about the Mormon religion, and I absolutely did not believe one shred of it. And I was not going to pretend that I did. I was not going to play like I was not going to go along with it just for the sake of my son's wedding. And so that meant I would be outside of the temple and not get to participate. So I took the first step by coming out of the Mormon closet and saying I am a non-believer and I will not be there. So my son took his endowments out, and his wife took their endowments out about a week before their wedding was to take place. And that experience in the temple was shocking to me. I decided to go to the temple and wait in the little tiny waiting room. We were at the Logan Temple in Utah, and they were going through a session. I want to say, I don't know, we were there at least 2 hours. They might have done their washing and anointings and then an endowment session. So it was a long ass time. I had to sit and wait in the waiting room. And there happened to be another man in the room, the waiting room with me. So it was just the two of us. So we got to talking. And that was the first time that I really experienced another person who no longer believed in the church, but he was pretending and trying to repent and come back and make good with his wife and do all the rituals. And it was the most interesting conversation that I had with somebody else who had lost their faith, but was still wanting to pretend to come back and participate. And he was going through the repentance process to eventually go back to the temple with his wife. And his wife was there doing a session by herself, and he was being, a good supportive husband and sitting in the waiting room the entire time while she's in the endowment. And by the end of that time, it was crystal clear that he was hitting on me and not had truly not repented or given up any of his ways. He was just trying to pull the wool over her eyes. And I was like, oh my gosh, I was so naive in the church. I had no idea. And then that just kind of opened up another door of like realizing Mormons and swinging is a huge thing. And there's a whole bunch of Mormons that are out there swapping spit with other couples and other things. I mean, it blew my mind, because these people still go to the temple. They still hold callings. They still act like they are the picture perfect Mormons, but they have, they drink alcohol and they swing and they're doing all these other things on the side. It just blew my mind. Like that was never a consideration for me when I was in the church. Like I would have had way too much cognitive dissonance to do those kinds of things, and still attend church on Sunday and take the sacrament. Like I would be the person wanting to go confess to the bishop that I had done something, wrong. But there are so many people in the Mormon church who do not feel that way. And they can drink alcohol, drink coffee, swap partners, and still go to church on Sunday, pass the sacrament, teach a Relief Society lesson, and not bat an eye. I was so fucking naive as a Mormon, because that would have never crossed my mind to like live a lie. That's how I see it, that these people were living a lie. So for me, there's a quote I want to share, what Jeff Brown calls a truth ache. And he explains it this way. A truth ache is a nudging sense of falsity, a palpable hunger for true path. A truth ache is what we experience internally when we are not honoring our divine purpose of simply living a lie in relationships or other areas in our life. And that's how I found myself after leaving the Mormon church. I had been told this was the one true church of God, the only way for salvation, the only way to get back to God. And now it was destroyed. So what's the truth? What's the true church? What's the true path? I mean, it was daunting to figure out what was I going to replace my Mormon beliefs with. Leo Tolstoy said, truth, like gold, is to be obtained not by its growth, but by washing away from it all that is not gold. And that's what happened to me. I had all these beliefs, and I had to figure out which ones were still true and which ones were garbage. And so I was kind of like a kid in a candy store, because I could believe anything I wanted at that point. I knew what I didn't believe as far as Mormonism goes, and the crazy batshit stories that I had been spoon-fed since my birth. And now I could pick and choose anything. I had a little time as a born-again Christian. Actually, for almost 2 years, I kind of played in the waters of Christianity with different sects. Catholicism, studied that a little bit. Definitely the born-again Christians were more attractive to me. Universal Life Church. That one I joined in 2014 as a minister so that I could do Reiki and marry people. So yeah, I got to play in beliefs and just try them all on, figure out which ones fit me and which ones did not work for me. And Randy and my family, of course, were not happy. Mormons are, you don't get to pick and choose. It is a one size fits all, and that's Mormonism. And if you choose not to do that, you are just in Satan's power and you are fucked. Basically, you're fucked. Betty White said, "Butterflies are like women. We may look pretty and delicate, but baby, we can fly through a hurricane." And a hurricane is what was brewing in my life, especially, the people who were closest to me. I really only had one sister-in-law who had left Mormonism on my husband's side, but she was still Christian and her husband were still Christian. On my side of the family, I had one sister out of 5 children. One sister was still Mormon. Another sister was still Christian, but no longer Mormon. And then me, another sister, and my brother had all left the Mormon church and Christianity eventually. So I did have my sister and my brother to kind of lean on and get a little bit of support. They were really, truly the only foundational people that I felt I could anchor myself to, even though I didn't feel like I wanted to go down their exact paths. I at least had them to talk to, because most of my friends left me. If you leave Mormonism, you're like a disease, and you're like something so contagious. And it did not take long for the people of my ward who I thought were friends, or I would semi-consider friends, for them to have nothing to do with me. Once I removed myself from the community of the LDS community that, was my foundation in our neighborhood, it was like, man, you are on your own. There's only one person who still has pretty consistent contact with me from the ward, and she will remember me on birthdays and holidays, and she is the church's, I know she's assigned to me, but it's become more than just an assignment. I truly feel like she has genuine feelings of concern for our family, and that I could call on her in times of need to help us with things. But it is, she's the only one 14 years later who still, because we're still in the same house that we lived in when my life fell apart and the hurricane hit and I left Mormonism. And I can truly say there's really only one person from my past that still has any contact with me, because like I said, I'm contagious, and thinking for yourself might rub off on somebody else, and that's just a dangerous thing. The church constantly warns its members about having contact with people who have left the church. It's just not advised. So it was the hardest thing I've ever done, to say I no longer believe the Mormon church, and to stand up to friends and family and say, this is who I am now. Can we still have a relationship? And for the most part, everyone said no. For the most part, really close friends all left. And so, that's probably the hardest part, and maybe the reason why Mormons don't leave, because Mormonism takes over everything. Everything in your life is consumed by this religion, and if you choose not to participate in it anymore, there's a giant hole that is left in your life, and who or what is going to fill it? And that is something that the Mormons will say over and over. Where will you go? What will you do? Because Mormonism is all consuming, consumes everything. And Well, I at least wanted the option to figure that out. I was not willing to stay. I wanted to see what would come next into my life. And I honestly didn't know. It was terrifying, the unknown part of it. Because Mormonism has all the answers. It has all the answers to all your questions about life, about death, about resurrection. There's an answer in Mormonism for just about everything. And that was gone. So now I have no answers. It's a complete blank slate, and that can be terrifying. So what I came to understand is when Mormons say faith, they don't really mean faith. What faith means to them is loyalty. If you lose your faith in the church, the danger is that you're losing your loyalty to this church, this religious organization, and its dogma and its past. And what I found was my faith, not putting my faith anymore in a religious organization, but finding that faith within myself. That was a huge thing to figure out, that where my faith needed to be placed was not anything outside of me, but within myself. If I had faith in myself, faith in being able to figure my life out by myself, faith was actually freedom for me. Having faith in myself is what led to my freedom. And that's why I say an apostate is an escaped slave. Don't be afraid to be an apostate, because that means you have escaped a mindset. And that is freedom. That is very, very freeing. So faith for me, going through my dark night of the soul, having my entire belief system stripped away from me. Faith is not something you do or have. It's something that you become. You become faithful. Faith is an inner accepting, an allowance, and a surrendering to life. That's how I view faith. It's not a belief, and it's not tied to my beliefs. It is just who I am. So my newfound faith allowed me to accept the idea for the first time that saying I don't know is actually a great thing. Because as a Mormon, we know, we have all the answers. And as a non-Mormon, it actually was very freeing to be able to say, I don't know, or I might not know, or I think. I don't know. It sounds arrogant and conceited and foolish to think that Mormons have all the answers, but that is absolutely how I felt as a Mormon. And many, many Mormons absolutely feel that way. So finding faith outside of my religion and inside of me allowed me to take that leap from Mormonism to mysticism, from Mormon to mystic, which is the title of my podcast. And yeah, it was a hard fucking road and dark. There were times where, it was so painful to go through conversations with my husband, with my children, because at the time, my son and his wife, who had gone through the temple, it was not an easy road for them, for our relationship, until finally they were ready at a point to come out of the church. But while they were deeply in it, there were times when I couldn't be close to them because they saw me as dark. And that's how ex-Mormons are viewed a lot of times, that we now have this darkness over us because we have left the light of Mormonism. And that really is a sad, horrible, hurtful belief system, that the people who leave are filled with darkness, that we're in Satan's power, that we're evil, that we've been deceived. And it's very, very real how Mormons think and believe about those that leave the church. And it's just, it can be so hard. And I just want to say how grateful that I followed their wishes and backed off and, really let them have their space to discover for themselves what they wanted to believe, even though I wanted to talk about it and share the things that I had found about the church. It was clear that nobody can tear you from your path. And I couldn't tear my children from their paths if I, wanted to, which I desperately did. I didn't want my children to still be Mormon. But that was not for me to walk and to decide. And that was a lesson I learned more than once with my children. And I'll share some of those stories in the future. But Mandy Hale said, "Growth is painful. Change is painful. But nothing is as painful as staying stuck where you don't belong." And for me, losing my religion absolutely was the best thing ever and the hardest thing ever, to walk away from that mindset and that lifestyle, and then to figure out how to co-parent and coexist in our marriage without the same belief system. We were so brainwashed and indoctrinated into this idea that our marriage couldn't work if we weren't on the same spiritual path. And that took a lot to, for me, to unwind and to realize he could still be Mormon and I could be on this mystical, shamanic, indigenous path, and we could still find a way to raise our kids and be happy together. Maybe not as happy as we would have been if I'd have stayed in the church, but I would have been miserable. I was miserable as a Mormon. I was at the breaking point when my back literally broke. And so to me, it's not a coincidence that my faith crisis unfolded the way it did, with my body literally breaking. I believe in a body, mind, soul, spirit connection. And, mentally and spiritually, I was at a breaking point, and my physical body did break. Without that break and that moment of being able to step away from my life for 2 weeks, I don't know. I don't know, what would have caused me to leave Mormonism, other than just it was the path I was supposed to walk. I was supposed to find my way out of Mormonism. So I view it as a blessing. My husband still views it as a tragedy, because he is still in that mindset of the Mormon beliefs that, somehow, some way I'm going to have to pay for my sins of leaving the church. But that's how Mormons believe, that there's always hope, because Christ didn't really die for everyone's sins. Christ, in Mormons' mindset, Christ came to wipe out the original sin of Adam and Eve. That's truly what Christ's sacrifice was for. And then it's up to Mormons to live a perfect life and repent for their sins and try to do everything, endure to the end. Mormons pay for their own sins in the next life, and so does everybody else. And that's a big difference between Mormon Jesus and mainstream Christian Jesus. They're not the same, and that will be a future video talked about. Boyd K. Packer, an apostle, dead apostle of the church, he had this to say about truth. "I have a hard time with historians because they idolize the truth. Truth is not uplifting. It destroys. Historians should tell only that part of the truth that is inspiring and uplifting." That is a talk he gave titled "The Pillars of My Faith" in the Sunstone Symposium, Salt Lake City, August 19th, 1994. That is part of the reason why I was so angry when I first discovered the deception of the church, because the truth that was not faith promoting, that was not uplifting, had been hidden by the church and had just not been acknowledged. And when you find it out, it for me, it was infuriating. I was so mad that I did not know. And I felt like I deserved to know the truth. I deserved to have the choice, and to know things about Joseph Smith that were not faith promoting or uplifting about church history. But I didn't get to make that decision because the LDS Church hid it from its members, and it still does. I mean, it's given a little bit more information now in 2025 than in 2011. But for me, I want the truth at any cost. I would rather know. For me, truth is more important than opinions and superstitions and mythology. So the truth is precious. The truth is freedom. And we deserve to know the history of the church. And it's sad because the history of the church, we need people who have been in the church and then left it to pull the truth out to the light, because the church will not do it otherwise. That's, they've answered questions because of the Tanners that came out in the early 70s and did all the research. People like Jeremy Reynolds, who wrote the CES letter, John DeLynn with Mormon Stories. Like, if we don't have people who wake up and leave the church, the church is going to try to stay as hidden and cover its mistakes as best it can, because it is damaging. And so it's up to us as members, former members, to be willing to go down the rabbit hole and look at things that are not faith promoting, because otherwise you're just like an ostrich with your head stuck in the sand. And that was me for a good, most of my life, 42 years as a Mormon. So yeah, I'm grateful for my dark night of the soul, my back breaking, and having my eyes opened. Osho said, the ultimate state of love is freedom, absolute freedom, and any relationship that destroys freedom is not worthwhile. Love is a sacred art. To be in love is to be in a holy relationship. And I will say that is how Randy and I finally kind of mended this broken fence that we had. We were finding that our love, and it still is, stronger than we realized, stronger than our belief systems, and stronger than our indoctrination, brainwashing, conditioning in the Mormon Church. Elizabeth Gilbert, when talking about soulmates, said, people think a soulmate is your perfect fit, and that's what everyone wants. But a true soulmate is a mirror, the person who shows you everything that is holding you back, the person who brings you to your own attention so that you can change your life. A true soulmate is probably the most important person you'll ever meet, because they tear down your walls and they smack you awake. I love that quote. And I believe many people can come into our lives as soulmates, that we don't have just one soulmate. I feel like we have a soul family. And soulmates are more than just sexual partners or lovers. They could be our children, our parents, our friends, soulmates. And Randy and I consider us soulmates. And after experiencing this dark night of the soul, leaving my religion, and him sticking by my side, which is not the normal thing for, especially a husband, the authority figure, the priesthood holder, for him to stick by me and to defy the bishop and say, I'm not going to control my wife. That's huge. And I feel like our family has been better as a mixed faith household. That the ripple effects of me throwing that giant stone into our pond and just disrupting the waters of our belief system. We have 8 children, and yeah, he might not have wanted me to throw that stone into our pond and cause all the destruction at the time, but now 14 years later, I think we can look back and maybe both say that it was worth it in the end. No, I guess we were interviewed. I'm going to see if I can find that quote. We were interviewed by, I'm not going to remember her name, from the Salt Lake Tribune, a woman who does the here we go, Peggy Fletcher from the Salt Lake Tribune. She did an article, I want to say this is 2015 or 2016, and she came to our home and interviewed us because she was doing this article on mixed faith households in Utah. And she interviewed Randy, and this is what he said to her, and she put in the paper. Randy said, "Religion is just a portion of who you are. It is not everything. Things have a way of working out here and in heaven." And I love that he said that, because that was in the early, still very trying years of that hurricane that I started. And I totally agree with his comment. Things have a way of working out here and in heaven. And it's been a wild ride, but one that I do not regret, having taken our family down this road of leaving the church. It is not easy. It was not, I would say, for the weak-hearted, or you have to be really sure that you can handle what will come, because leaving the Mormon church can destroy everything. It will have ripple effects and consequences, and that is why a lot of people choose not to go down that road, because it is fucking hard. It is scary, and especially when your whole life is tied up into the religion. That's also why I view Mormonism as a cult, because it is not easy to break free from the mindset or break free from the control. So yeah, my story is all written down in my book, Sacred Light, My Journey from Mormon to Mystic. And I'll put a link to that in case anyone wants to know more about the details, of the Mormon church. And then I also share my mystical path, and I'll talk more about that in the future, but I really feel like it's important to explain the Mormonism first, because that was so much, it's just a huge part of my life, for 42 years. And so I'm still going to be covering a lot of Mormonism and things like that, but I just felt like it was right now to share part of my story about how I left. And I will share more about how we've been able to make this mixed faith household work for us. If anyone is questioning their religion, questioning their doubts, I would say just put that faith in yourself and take the leap, take the chance, go down the rabbit holes, be curious, and find out what's been hidden from you. Because I know Mormonism isn't the only religion that has hidden their facts, but Mormons definitely, like Boyd K. Packer said. They don't like the truth that is ugly. They don't like those truths to be seen. So do your research, and living an authentic life is more important than not rocking the boat. They want you to stay, and they use that analogy a lot. Stay in the ship, stay in the safety, stay in the container of the church, because it's scary on the outside and it's harsh. And yeah, and that's all true. It is hard to leave that ship of Mormonism, the fellowship that the church creates. But if you're like me, it is worth it. And I would much rather be authentic and walk in integrity outside of the church than try to pretend and fit into the mold that does not work for me, and try to conform and contort in order to fit that Mormon mold. Is just not a life I was okay doing. So yeah, there you have it. That's kind of my story in a nutshell. Thanks for listening. Till next time.